Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has likely died following a strike carried out as part of a joint military operation by Israel and the United States, which began on the morning of February 28 and was aimed at key figures in Tehran. This has been reported by a number of international media outlets. The publication For Jerusalem Post, citing Israeli officials, reports that Iran's Supreme Leader has been deprived of the ability to communicate, and there is no certainty about his future fate. According to a preliminary assessment by Israeli officials, Khamenei was injured as a result of the strike. There has been no official confirmation from Israeli, American, or Iranian sources. Earlier, the New York Times reported that the residence of Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in Tehran was struck. According to satellite images, thick black smoke rose above the building and significant destruction was recorded. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry states that almost all officials are reportedly alive and unharmed. According to Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Rakchi,
the head of the judiciary, the Speaker of Parliament, and all high-ranking officials are alive, including the Secretary of the National Security Council. Everyone is currently at their posts.
The Iranian foreign minister also added that 2 commanders were killed, but according to him, this is not a major problem. Journalists also note that there are growing signs regarding the elimination of Khamenei. It was previously reported that he was at least wounded. Khamenei was supposed to deliver an address. In a Channel 12 TV report, it is suggested that the address may have been recorded in advance. It is reported that the strikes caused significant damage both to military commanders and to the political leadership of Iran as a whole. It is also reported that the Iranian Minister of Defense and the head of intelligence were likely eliminated as well.
Vitaly Kulik, director of the Center for Civil Society Studies, is joining us now. Vitaly, hello.
Greetings to you.
Good afternoon.
How do you assess this, Vitaly? Do you really see this as a chance for the Iranian people? Destruction of the Khamenei, and this is at least how the European Union sees it. We have heard of Ursula von der Leyen. How do you assess these complex processes within Iran, considering that the regime has not changed?
It should be noted that it is still too early to talk about any qualitative changes within the regime, since there are various factions. Even the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is meant here. The Guardians of the Revolution, a power structure. There are different factions among the clerics who are supposed to determine the future of the political regime. And there are those who believe that more concessions and a negotiation process are necessary. Therefore, at this point, it is quite difficult to talk about a transformation of the political regime itself. On the other hand, it is clear that after the authorities managed to harshly suppress the previous mass protests in Iran through terror and the use of paramilitary structures, not only of Iranian origin, but also Iraqis, Shiites who were brought into Iran to suppress the uprising. The fact that force was used without hesitation, extrajudicial executions. There were also widespread purges. There were brutal political killings, and there were violent crackdowns happening in the streets. In other words, through terror, they managed to intimidate a significant number of people. And to say that now people will take to the streets in protest, especially in a situation of escalation and external threat, is also a complicated question. Iran has learned how to block social networks. Right now, the internet is shut down in Iran. Attempts to break through the information blockade are quite difficult. There is a mobilization of regime supporters. They will defend themselves. This is not a demoralization of the regime itself. In other words, it still has a certain social base, and it is unlikely that this will lead to a social explosion right now, that the regime will get tired, and as a result, there will be a collapse and then a revolution. No, that is unlikely to happen. What could happen? There could be a transformation of the regime towards, first of all, the election of new leadership, which would be more inclined to negotiate rather than take radical actions. On the other hand, this could be an attempt and an opportunity for part of the political elite to get rid of the influence of the late Khamenei's son, Majaraba, who has created a system of parallel power within the security forces, the army, and the country's economy. They profited from the sanctions regime. People made money from terrorism, circumventing sanctions, illegal trade, drug trafficking, and arms trafficking, and similar things. That is, all the power, truly a parallel power, was concentrated not even in the hands of the Supreme Rabbar, the leader of the Islamic Revolution, but in the hands of his son. And the son, without holding any official positions, without any official roles in the country, through his connections in the IRGC and through paramilitary security formations, had a parallel system of governance, leadership, and coordination with various agencies, from the army, starting with the IRGC, to the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Finance, the tax authorities, and so on. And now this system is supposedly in a destabilized state, and part of the elite might get rid of Majarab. In that case, there is a chance that a scenario could emerge, a sort of mix of what happened in Venezuela under Delcy Rodriguez, the acting president of Venezuela, who is inclined toward negotiations with the United States, more willing to make deals while still maintaining fairly radical rhetoric, demonstrating a showy, superficial anti-Americanism. This allows the regime to preserve itself, to delay democratic transition, to secure for itself some guarantees that in the future in Venezuela they will still have some role. It seems that something similar is about to happen now in Iran as well. Part of the elite will try to get rid of the radicals, of Majaraba and his grip, when he holds the whole country by the throat, and accordingly a reformatting of the regime itself. How successful this will be, time will tell. In my opinion, we can expect a new wave of attacks by the Americans and Israelis on Iran's infrastructure facilities. I do not rule out that there will be attempts to eliminate other individuals within the top leadership of Iran. I think the target could be Majaraba himself or other radicals within the highest political leadership. Right now, we are observing two prominent individuals who are directly and ideologically linked to Khamenei and who are seen as significant radicals. These figures are the head of the judiciary, Ajani, and the head of the Supreme National Security Council. Additionally, there is someone who is exceptionally close, or at least was and remains very close to the inner circle. That was Larijani, who was close to Khamenei. So these two people, AJ and Larijani, are quite radical in their political views and in their positions regarding the domestic situation in Iran. But times change, as they say, and the orientation of these individuals and their influence can also change. At some point, as long as power remains in the hands of the triumvirate, there is an institutional foundation for the Islamic Republic. This is a specific feature of the Republic itself, the way it is structured. These are institutions, formal, direct ones that are authorized, as well as parallel religious institutions. The institutional capacity of the regime to reproduce itself is quite high. So even the elimination of some part of the leadership, the same goes for Khamenei or his closest circle, their removal would not lead to a swift overthrow of the regime. In other words, the regime is firmly anchored in its institutional framework. Accordingly, some additional time will be needed for military and political pressure. After that, the regime may transform and adopt new negotiating positions. For now, we are hearing rather radical statements from Tehran that there will be no negotiations, that the war will continue, and that Iran will strike at neighboring countries, including American military infrastructure, both in the region and in research institutes. We can see how the war has already spread to Lebanon. Hezbollah has joined the military action. The Houthis and other proxies controlled by Iran throughout the greater Middle East have become more active. It can be expected that Iran will try to ignite military action wherever it can reach. And they have inspired various groups, even those not of Shiite origin, to carry out attacks either against the American military presence or their allies. Iran's goal is also to exert political or military political pressure on the countries of the region. These are terrorist attacks. There have been attacks on the Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, even Oman has been targeted, as well as Syria itself, and with Saudi Arabia as well. In this way, the aim is to push these countries to in turn put pressure on the United States. But it should be noted that not all Gulf monarchies are willing to passively observe the situation. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia made a rather radical statement. for the first time, by the way, since the reconciliation with the Iranians. With China's mediation, Saudi Arabia has taken a very tough stance, and even the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia delivered a rather dismissive speech. He explicitly stated that the Saudis would open fire and would actively resist any aggression, including carrying out preemptive strikes, directed specifically against the nation of Iran, if Iran were to launch a direct military attack on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. Iran has one peculiarity: when they are under pressure, whether from Israel or the United States, and there is some kind of attack on their infrastructure, after such pressure and humiliation, when Iran is unable to respond adequately to, say, Israel, apart from launching a missile strike on Israeli territory, it strikes at military bases or the infrastructure of neighboring countries, accusing those neighbors of providing their territory or airspace for strikes against Iran. This happened last time and the time before that, when Iran struck at Saudi Arabia's oil rigs, or carried out strikes in Syria, or struck against the opposition, or even targeted Bahrain. Now the Saudis are preparing to respond. There is confirmation that the Saudis are planning to respond to possible retaliatory strikes from Iran, and this means that the war could escalate. Other active players with sufficiently strong armed forces and military potential could also get involved. For example, responses from the Emirates. They are unlikely to be powerful enough, but responses from the Saudis could be quite painful for Iran. Inside the country, accordingly, there is a certain attempt to reignite protest sentiment within Iran itself. Right now, we see that people, there are videos and evidence, are celebrating the killing of Khamenei. Part of the urban population is welcoming it. Thank you. They welcome the attacks and the destabilization of the regime, but for now, it's hard to say whether this protest movement will gain new momentum. The main problem is the lack of internet and communication. If it becomes possible to break through the information blockade, they're talking about Starlink deliveries, about providing new ones, some ways to get through the firewall that has been set up in Iran. And if that happens and communication is restored, then there is a chance that an uprising or some kind of protest will begin, and the regime will transform more quickly.
Yes, that's very interesting. And of course, I would like to continue the conversation about how Britain and France, who are calling not to attack their ports, well, it's interesting here to consider how ready they actually are to join the US and Israel's operation against Iran. But of course, there isn't enough time. Thank you very much. Vitaly Kulik, Director of the Center for Research. Thank you.